the COP. Mr. Bishop, I think it's Mr. Bishop, yes.
All right. Excited to jump into the 2023 COP presentation. As I look at us as a utility, we are in an incredible time from a transformative perspective of where we're going with the organization. So again, just really excited to be able to present this. We'll be looking for board approval in December at the regular board meeting. We will be working to address any questions that come out of this conversation or that transpire before we get into that board meeting. Relative to my goal, I want to make sure that we've conveyed to you the strategy that we've used to develop this plan, the key assumptions that are driving the plan, the financial outcomes, including the rate impact that would be brought forward by the plan, and also key projects that are entailed in the plan. And again, there's the presentation, but then there's also the COP book, which provides quite a bit more detail relative to the underlying assumptions, critical large projects that are being undertaken under the 2023 COP. Before we jump into it, though, I do want to recognize the efforts. Again, we've got the amount of people power that goes into this is unbelievable. Thousands and thousands of hours to make this happen. Again, we've got Brad Sire and his team, the business partners in FP&A that facilitate this, but it goes all across the entire organization, managers as well as subject matter experts that pull this together. Really, it's an 8-month effort. Starts in March. We really focus in and look at our load forecasting work that's done by our corporate planning organization and customer group, as that is the critical business driver for our plan. We then work through the wholesale marketing with corporate planning. Again, that is the most volatile aspect of our business and complex as we think through what the various costs for us to provide power are. With that, we also, I think it's worthwhile to mention the strategic full-day sessions that we had as an ELT team, really making sure as we looked forward, there's always more asks than resources. And so we had a need to really come up with a priority process. We came up with 6 strategic priorities that I'll take a moment just to walk us through. But with that, again, we wanted to make sure that we were delivering on the items that we committed to the board. This does support the Power of the Future 2050 journey that we're on. And the 4 items were this. Priority 1 was resource adequacy, making sure that we've got reliability and adequacy, both from a power supply and a grid perspective, focusing on our Power with a Purpose gas projects. We also have related transmission and distribution projects that support those to support growth and reliability. And then also Power with a Purpose solar. So we've got Platteview, but then also looking for 519 other additional megawatts. And then also completing our Cass County line. As we look at priority number 2, that was really focused in on technology and transformation investment. And again, the key there, and we've talked about this, is to have a strong technology backbone. We needed to address our technology debt, strengthen our tech resiliency with data center co-locations, access management, and improve our data governance, and that's included in here as well. Priority number 3 was around two-way communication engagement. So we've talked a lot about our AMI program. We want to improve the customer experience and tools to support that, reduce our outage time. And to do that, we need to move forward with our meter replacement program, improving our outage management system, our geoinformational system or GIS system, and then also upgrade our billing system. Those are all things that are required for us to be able to achieve those increased outcomes relative to our customer expectations and improve operationally. And we've also got a focus on customer web interfaces. As we look at priority number 4, which is really our master facilities plan, looking at our data center requirements and key facilities. I will say this, having worked at a couple different utilities, facilities has traditionally been an area that's been underinvested in over the course of time. And so I appreciated the fact that we're placing that as a priority. Coming out of that, we moved forward with the resource optimization sessions at the ELT. That was a 2-month process where we hone in and finalize our O&M and headcount. And then also from a resource planning council, The RPC, that's the group that goes through and prioritize, it's cross-functional, prioritizes all of our capital to meet our needs moving forward. And so, ton of time and effort going into this. Really appreciate the support across the entire organization. And again, the importance of this is the fact that this is the tool that we use to guide our business. It provides us the financial discipline, sets the operating plan for the coming year, and it's critical as it relates to us being able to interface with our investors and rating agencies. So it's really a multifaceted tool. So with that, let's jump into the main assumptions. If we can go to the next slide. So I want to be able to walk us through the material assumptions that are driving our plan. And again, as we look at this, there's a good news right out of the gate as we talk about revenue adjustments. Good news, no general increase. I think that's a comment on the team's focus and financial discipline to keep our rates as affordable as possible in alignment with our mission. I feel fortunate that we're in the position that we're in. And I think it's important that we call out a couple data points. We have been experiencing inflation, general inflation across all sectors through October is about 8%. When we look specifically at the energy sector, it's 17%. And so, as we think through those factors that are impacting our business, they're quite sizable. One item that we talked about at the Finance Committee was reporting out across other utilities, and there's an EIA report out that shows rate increases from May of 21 to May of 22 being on average 11%. And so, again, we feel very fortunate that we're not in that position. We have no general rate increase. As it relates to fuel and purchase power adjustment, we'd be requesting a 2.9% increase in our FPPA factor that would become effective January 1st. We don't take this lightly. As I'd highlighted in the Q3 financial report, we've seen dramatic increases in commodity prices. And so really that's what's driving this need, large increases in the wholesale markets, fuel and purchase power. And that's what this mechanism is meant to do. It's meant to capture that volatility that we don't have control over. It's a pass-through, so while it goes up, it can go down if prices do come down. And again, this is a very common tool now in the utility space. As we look at retail energy sales, we're continue to see substantial growth, both in the commercial and industrial space, 6.8%. That produces $86 million of cash flow on an annual basis. That's a critical benefit to the organization. It allows us to invest in our people and resources. And with that, again, if we do not have that level of rate, that cash flow that's created through load growth, then you either need to increase rates or reduce costs. And so again, it's a sizable benefit. I'm going to go through our wholesale revenues, purchase power and fuel relatively quickly because we have a slide that really captures the essence of those. When we think through that, again, we look at them from a total net power cost perspective. We've got our purchase power and fuel expense, but that gets partially offset by our wholesale sales. Those are the largest drivers of the volatility in our business and what's triggering the FPPA. As we think through, and you can see the comparison here, the 2022 budget versus 2022 projection. The projection really has highlighted what I've made, the comments I made in the Q3 report, and the fact that we've seen substantially elevated prices in 2022, anywhere from 100 to 200%, as I had mentioned in that report. As we think through the 23 projection, again, we've seen when we look at the forward curve that it's come down slightly, but still at an elevated level, and that's what's driving our FPPA, our need for an FPPA adjustment. We can move on to the next slide. Again, we see here fuel, an increase in the 2022 budget compared to what we had in last year's budget. However, a decrease to the projection. I think that plays out with what I had mentioned before. And again, I apologize for going long on the Q3 report, but I did want to take that opportunity to really highlight what was going on in the commodity markets because that does impact what we've got here in the COP. When we look at expenditures, total expenditures that we're budgeting for is $1.9 billion. That's being split between capital operating expenditures, again, to maintain reliability of our system, future load growth, and strategic priorities. we continue to see substantial growth that had come up a number of different times earlier today when we were going through the different committee updates. That requires investment in our T&D and generation infrastructure, staffing increases to address new generation as that comes on board, customer growth. And we're also increasing our spend on customer and employee programs. As we think through some of the additional pieces that are contained in the plan, power with a purpose, assets that we talked about, investments in grid resiliency and our different strategic initiatives. Again, those all get incorporated as an ask as part of that $1.9 billion. From a financing perspective, again, to support a capital program, we're expecting to issue in July. It's 400 doing debt issuance of would result in proceeds of $480 million. And again, that is needed and critical as it relates to our maintaining our AA rating, meeting our capital needs, and also continuing to support us from a AA rating perspective. From a Fort Calhoun perspective, budget contributions continue, we continue to our funding. We are expected to be done funding our Fort Calhoun work by 2024, so that should free up a good amount of money. What we're seeing here is that the contributions are less than our decommissioning expenditures, so that is in line with what we had anticipated. We've been funding that for a good period of time. We're completing the work, and ultimately we'll be done funding that in the end of 2024, which will ultimately free up a good amount of cash flow, over $100 million, that we can deploy at other places within our business. We can go to the next slide. Relative to our reserves, we have no planned changes for the decommissioning benefits reserve account, or the DEBRA account, or our rate stabilization account. We'll leave those unchanged. What I did want to talk about was our 2023 baseload budget major outages. So when we think about our assets, it's critical that we maintain them for the long run. Some utilities tend to spend less money on those, and that can impact system availability, both in the short term and the long term. And again, as we think about the criticality of reliability, and then also how that impacts us from a financial perspective, it's imperative that we maintain our assets. As we look at what we're anticipating for outages for 2023, we are seeing an increased number of days and expenditures, and that's anticipated. That will result in higher O&M as well as higher net power costs as a result of that. And again, if we want to maintain our assets adequately, we need to make sure that we're following those appropriate maintenance schedules and putting the time and effort that we need to into them. Our outage days between 23 and will increase from 22 by about 65 days, so from 53 to 118 days. And then relative to our outage dollars, those will go from 11 million to 23 million. So again, both an O&M and outage day increase, that will reduce the amount of generation that we're able to receive from them. But again, as we think about the longer term implications, this is critical work that needs to get done. We can go on to the next slide, please. All right, we've got our operating revenues excluding wholesale revenues, and I want to pause for a moment. As a finance professional, this is a slide that I really enjoy. We've got predictable growth over the course of time, measured. And again, as we think through this, we look at what's composing that. Residential continues to anchor the utility, followed by commercial, and lastly, industrial. When we look at the 2022 budgeted level versus projection, one item I did want to highlight that we did have residential coming in higher due to the hot summer. We talked about that a little bit in the Q3 report. We have seen more cooling degree days than originally budgeted. When we think about 2023, though, we weather normalize, and so that means that we remove those days and assume average weather normalized temperatures. And again, so you won't see a large increase. Actually, it's $1 million decline between residential, between the projected versus budgeted, but hopefully that works to explain what's driving that. Looking ahead, we definitely continue to see substantial growth in the industrial and commercial areas. Industrial reflects a growth of 18.7% of our load growth, driven by volumes and load growth. As we look at our commercial growth, we can see that that's driven by load growth of about 1.4%, adding 157 additional customers, which is always good as we continue to look for a more diversified customer base. We'll move on to the next slide. Here we've got fuel and purchase power as well as our wholesale revenues. Again, we need to look at those together because they impact each other as it relates to our total net power costs. And we have actually added a new slide that will come up next that captures this. There's an important storyline here, and I think hopefully folks are able to see the visual in terms of the amount of volatility that we have going through fuel purchase power and wholesale revenues. Folks will remember back in 2021, we had the polar vortex. That's why you see such a large increase in both of those charts. In 22, we budgeted at what we expected to be a return to normal levels. So we take a snapshot of what the forward curve is projecting when we put the budget together. That's our best estimate. That's what we use from a budgetary perspective. And then you can see again that we've experienced elevated prices in 22 when we look at the 2022 projections. And so when we think through, what's driving the FPPA, it's really going to be that volatility and the fact that when we compare our 2022 budget to 2023 budget, we're seeing an increase across the categories. One item that I did want to highlight, again, I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail from a power cost perspective, knitting them together. When we do look at what we've got budgeted in 2022 versus 2023, natural gas, we see an increase of 121%, going from $2.58 to $5.72. Again, a substantial driver of the FPPA. Coal prices increasing by about 19%. And then as it relates to our on-peak prices for power, those are going up by about 29%, with on-peak pricing being at $36.59 versus $28 in 2022. Similarly, off-peak increasing by 44%, going from $18 to $26 in 2023. So again, sizable increases that we're seeing from a price point perspective. You go to the next slide, you'll see what our net power costs are. This is again just a different perspective, looking back over the past 5 years to see where those costs have come in. As we talked about, 21 and 2022 are really kind of those outliers. You do see that the net impact when we look at 2022 budget versus 2023, you can see that we're increasing from a budgetary perspective. And again, that's what's going to be driving our need for a fuel and purchase power adjustment. As we move on to the next slide, here we've got our operation and maintenance expense. Again, this excludes any of the energy costs. And what we're seeing here in terms of primary drivers for the overall growth in O&M, we've got, as I talked about before, increased outages that are expected in 2023. Again, those are temporary items that increase, but those are items that get reflected as O&M costs. Increased SPP fees, headcount growth, and then also increased benefit costs. So when we look at each of the categories, and I'm going to compare the 2022 budget to the 2023 budget at a T&D level, again, the growth that we're seeing here is as a result of increased headcount. As we look at the additional needs for heads to address the load growth that we've got, that's driving a portion of it. And then we've also got about a $10 million increase in our fees associated with the Southwest Power Pool. And that's driving the increase in the transmission and distribution section. Customer sees a fairly minimal increase of about $2 million. And again, that's driven by increased demand side management incentives, and then also some additional headcount to administer those programs. As we look at production costs, again, you can see there that year over year, the increases are largely associated with the increased outage expenses, about $12 million, as I highlighted earlier. And then we've also got additional headcount that's needed to folks that will be operating our new plants moving forward. Relative to our A&G costs, we've got an $8 million increase there. And again, a portion of that is associated with our pension performance, unfortunately. As we go through, we do an annual retirement contribution calculation, and it looks at what the return was and what we're projecting over the course of time. And it does a 5-year smoothing to reflect those adjustments that have come through. We're reflecting a 10% decrease, and that's resulted in about a $4 million increase in our annual retirement contribution for 2023. As I'd highlighted in the retirement plan report, we're above that. So if that doesn't return, we'll see a higher contribution required in 2023. But again, optimistically, we'll hopefully see that more moderate and hopefully come in closer to the 10% that we've assumed here. Again, that was our best estimate at the point in time that we were able to pull this together. But those are the majority of the drivers in A&G. The other piece would be increased medical expenditures that we're seeing come through from an A&G perspective. We can move on to the next slide. So when we look at our capital expenditures, again, a large ask relative to our capital program. We're really in year 2 of our Power with a Purpose investments. I'll talk through that in a little bit more detail. Again, when we think through back in 2021, we really started our Power with a Purpose, getting those up and running. 2022, we've seen a pretty sizable increase in our Power with a Purpose spend. We have seen some of those dollars get delayed, about $85 million to 2023. And so when we think about 2023, it would be slightly lower if we weren't able to, if we didn't have that deferral from 2022. So that's bumping up our 2023 ask. As it relates to our focus for 2023, really Power with a Purpose, our transmission and distribution investment in AMI. As we walk through each of those, the largest increases, and again, Power with a Purpose, focused on Standing Bear Lake and Turtle Creek. When we move into the T&D plant category, we do see a growth percentage there. And again, that's really driven by transmission and distribution increases. Part of that's associated with new growth for substations, so roughly $20 million. We've also got existing requirements to serve the Standing Bear Lake facility. That's about $11 million of an increase. As it relates to future sites for T&D, land and other, that's about a $36 million increase. And then relative to investing in our existing T&D infrastructure, about a $10 million increase to improve reliability. Lastly, we've got general plant, which has a growth rate of about 17%. Again, most of that's associated with our technology AMI program and hardening our technology infrastructure. And then also facilities investments and upgrades in some of our, and then investments in our vehicles. As we look into, I guess one other point on this slide, there's additional detail in the back of the COP document, the book that is available for review. That's got the detailed breakdown of the capital projects that do compose our 2023 ask. As we move on to the next slide, when we look at where we're spending our dollars for 2023, we want to be very intentional. We want to make sure that we're investing for the future, but we also are sustaining our existing assets. And again, what we see here is if you add the expand and strategic, you'll see that we're at a total of 71% associated with expansion, and then 29% associated with sustaining our existing assets. Again, we want to make sure that we're not underinvesting in our existing assets as they're critical for our ongoing reliability. Again, as we look at our sustain, that's to maintain our existing asset base. When I look at this and you put a dollar figure on it, 29% works out to $187 million in our capital budget. When I compare that back to our financials, not to be the accountant that I am, but we see that our depreciation is $160 million. So that makes me feel very comfortable that we're continuing to invest in sustaining our assets that are already used in operations. Again, that's a best practice from utility space and a good outcome to ensure that we're adequately maintaining our existing assets. When we go to expand, again, here we see that that's taking 61% or $390 million of our total capital budget. And that's really associated with our power with a purpose infrastructure projects. And then as we look at strategic, that's about 10% or $63 million. And again, that represents our focus on strategic priorities such as our AMI project. And so hopefully that's a useful view as you're looking at the different ways that the O&M, not only by function, but then by kind of category, as we call it, philosophy here, how those dollars are being spent. We can move on to the next slide, please. So with that, we will be active in terms of issuing debt. So for 2022, we completed that in October. Our A and B bond offering, about $420 million of par. We paid off $75 million of commercial paper with $345 million being available for our capital program. As we look forward, again, the amount that we'd be issuing at the par level is $504 million. Net proceeds would be roughly $480 million. And again, that's to invest in our capital program. Again, we don't anticipate adjusting anything relative to our commercial paper program. As we move forward, let's go to the next slide. Days cash on hand. Again, liquidity is key for the financial health of our organization. It's a focus with the rating agencies as well. And this dictates when we're doing our debt offerings. We talked about that as part of the Q3 results. And again, as we think through this, we had the question about where we need to be to maintain our AA rating. And that's roughly 150 to 270 days. That's highlighted in gray as the AA rated peer group from S&P. And again, this is important as we look at our strategic directives, strategic directive 3, access to credit markets, making sure that we're continuing to maintain that AA rating. That works also with our debt service coverage, which we plan to at a 2.0 level, 2 times. And so again, this plan keeps us comfortably with our debt offering in the range that we need to be relative to days cash on hand and our debt service coverage, which are critical to maintain our AA rating. As we move on to the next slide, this is a good news story. Our decommissioning trust withdrawals continue to exceed our contributions, and again, that's what we anticipated. We do need it's worthwhile to highlight some activity that's gone on in 2022. You'll see that we've got elevated trust contributions, and this is associated with the reimbursement dollars that we receive for spent fuel relative to the DOE. It's $77 million that we received in 2022. And again, that'll continue as we continue to look at their ability to recompensate us on an ongoing basis. That'll be a piece that we continue to evaluate and could potentially adjust our future funding requirements. We do expect, again, when we look out not past 23 and 24, that we'll see a decrease because we'll no longer be providing contributions based upon what we currently know. Things could change, but we anticipate that we will stop with our contributions at the end of 2024. Again, that will free up those dollars that we could likely invest in our capital program and be less reliant from a debt perspective on our capital investment. Let's move on to the next slide. Here's our debt to capitalization. Similar to 2022, we're obviously positioned to have a large capital program in 2023 to support our expansion of infrastructure, to maintain our existing assets. We need those dollars to be invested. We also need to make sure that we're maintaining our AA rating. And so with that, we will be continuing to issue debt, as I just highlighted. And so what you'll see here is that we'll continue to increase to 67% projected for 2023. And again, that assumes the $504 million debt issuance that we would be taking on in 2023. Relative to that, this is an area that we will focus on with the rating agencies. As we think through what that, S&P, they expect a very strong vertically integrated utility to be in the 50 to 60% range. So we continually work with them. Every time we go out and do a debt offering, we'll talk about what our multi-year projection is going to be. They're well aware of our plan. Obviously, we're above the 60%, but we discuss what our operating plans are, what our plans for repayment are, and ensure that we've got a very strong plan that they are confident with. And so we're able to continue to maintain our AA rating in spite of, again, our debt ratio increasing. All right, if we can go on to the next slide. So we've got the Brattle Group relative to they're hired by the board to do a review of both our COP as well as our rate proposal. Those documents are contained in the back or attached to the presentation if folks would like to review them. Again, they've done their preliminary review, no issues at this point. As it relates to the COP, they'll complete that before the December board approval. They have reviewed the rate proposal for both the FPPA and 261M. So again, those can be referenced as attached documents. If we continue on to the next slide. I think we've gone through this relative to the process. We'll be taking comments back, going through and briefing the Finance Committee in December on those comments received. Ultimately, we'll bring back the preliminary and finalized COP to the board on the 13th. We'll look for hopefully action on the 15th. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to address those at the end of the presentation. Again, we can go on to the next slide. I guess with that, Director Yoder, would you like me to continue on with the rate action, or would you like to stop up for a moment for questions?
Yeah, well, it's good news on the rate action, right? For at least the general rate case, and understandable in the second half. But let's go ahead and take some questions on what you've presented so far. If we've got any questions or comments, go ahead, Director Bogdan.
Well, I want to first highlight, Mr. Bishop, you've been with OPPD now exactly 1 year. And so this is why you were hired to, handle all things financial for us. And I think the COP you've laid out is a good reflection of the work that you're doing at the district. So I wanted to commend you and your team at the same time for that. And and I appreciate the days of cash on hand slide, since I asked that question earlier. Thanks for throwing that in here. When you started the presentation this afternoon, you talked about 6, I would say, strategic elements that you and the ELT considered when you were putting this together. I think you said 6. Or 4. Okay, could you just repeat just keywords for me, what those 4 were?
Yeah, priority 1 was resource adequacy, ensuring that we can keep a reliable system up, that we're continuing to deliver on the needs that we have for both our generation and T&D projects and areas. Priority 2 was technology transformation and investment. Again, that's really hardening the backbone from a technology perspective, having a resilient data center, resilient applications and design of architecture from a technology perspective. Number 3 was two-way communication engagement. That's the AMI program, which the board has been well briefed on. And then priority 4 was the master facilities plan, looking at kind of our aged infrastructure, what was needed to be done there in terms of data centers, key facilities, as we look at our existing infrastructure, our facilities, and potential new facilities that would be needed in the future.
Thank you for that recap. I appreciate it. It's not lost on me. If we go to the capital expenditure slide, it's slide 9 in my packet, but I don't think that's 1, 2 more. There you go, Kat. It's not lost on me that we're doing a lot in this space, and I was kind of taken back when I saw, what we spent in 2019 versus what we're planning to spend now. That's a lot of work. I guess how confident are we that we're going to be able to execute all of this work in one given year?
Well, that's a great question, and that's an item that we've pressed on with our work that we do when the RPC meets with folks and pushes on specifically what can we get done. And I think it's a great point to bring back as we were thinking through the 4 priorities that we talked about. That was one of the major drivers, was recognizing that there's always more interest in projects to get done than we can. And so that was meant to reduce and really focus the organization. There were a lot of items that had come up, and frankly, a lot of difficult conversations that happened with our people, specifically in the technology space, where additional projects wanted to be done, but we said, no, we're focused in on AMI. We're focused in on our Power with a Purpose projects. And so I think we've done a great job to try to coalesce and make sure that the organization is focused on that. We spent a substantial amount of time communicating that out across the organization. So I think we've done a really good job to get the organization focused so that we can deliver on the 2023 capital program.
Thank you very much.
Pass the mic to Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Jeff. And that's a fantastic question, Director Bogner. That's one that is top of mind for me. It's how do we execute all of these projects? We are in a very clear expansion mode, while expanding our system and then taking care of our existing facilities. It requires a lot of time and dedication from a lot of people, not only employees but contractors alike. And this is one where again the well-being of our employees, achieving work-life balance is top of mind, not only for me, but for the remaining of the executive leadership team. So this is one where, in addition to the supply chain constraints we're seeing across the country, it is our own labor that we have to be very, very careful about how are we deploying those precious resources to make sure that the work gets completed, and at the same time that we're positioning ourselves to continue this work. It is very likely that we will continue to see more expansion in the years to come. So we really have to take care of our people and our supply chain. But thank you for that question.
Thank you. I'm complete.
Thank you all. Director Moody.
Building on that, the facilities master plan, and I apologize if I missed it, but we've got that was a priority. Yep, priority number 4. Can you help me wrap my arms around what that looks like, what we're doing in the next year? I know that that's still perhaps a little bit in process, but maybe just a little bit more light on what that entails and what it could be, will be, might be.
Yeah, we're continuing to assess a couple different areas. And again, I'm going to, Brad Sire will pass this along to you for additional comments as well. But as we continue to look at kind of our aging facilities, it's really a focus on ensuring that we've got what we need for some of our critical facilities, for example, our data centers, also looking at different locations across the district. And it looks like, Javier, you've got your hand up.
Really quick, and this is just maybe a high-level overview. Excellent question, Director Moody, and this is one that we have mentioned in the past, but we really haven't had a chance to dive deeper into the Master Facilities Plan. We commissioned this Master Facilities Plan over 2 years ago, and it was really to do an assessment from an architectural perspective of every single facility that OPPD owns. So this is over 100 facilities, from very large, like Energy Plaza, to very, very small, like very small service centers we have in the territory. What this is allowing us to do is do a very methodical, very disciplined analysis of where do we have weaknesses, where do we need to direct resources to make sure that the facilities we have are always in good working condition. The pandemic gave us an opportunity to pause a little bit. We sent a lot of people to work from home. That emptied quite a few of the facilities, namely Energy Plaza. So that is allowing us to then do an even deeper dive on not only the status of the facility, but also start thinking about what what type of facilities we may need in the next 30 to 50 years, because some of the work that has happened in the same way for the past 5 decades may not necessarily be the way that we see work happening in the future. So more to come, but we wanted to make sure that from an organizational perspective, we did not lose focus on facilities. Jeff is absolutely right. Facilities tend to take a back seat most of the times with investments. This is one where the time is right for us to really focus on what are we doing with facilities. But we will have, when the time is right and we have more information, we will share that with the public and with the board with more specifics about the needs and plans that we have going forward.
That's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate the round summary. Super great. Debt ratio, two more. Debt ratio, Jeff, you that's one that I've been having my eye on, and naturally capital expenditures that we're looking at now relates very clearly to debt ratio. And I think if I recall, maybe in finance committee, we've seen kind of some perhaps long-term projections for what that looks like. But for the public, if you could shine a little light on what's important, you know, as we think about 24 and forward, if you could draw some broad conclusions about where that's headed.
Yeah, you know, we'll expect that to come back down, you know, as it highlighted as it relates to our decommissioning trust and our ability to redeploy those funds that would otherwise be going into the trust, to utilize those elsewhere. That's directly where you'd start to see that as we look at how we're financing our capital programs moving forward, that those dollars would be utilized for that. So over the course of time, we'll be paying this down. And we do project it to decrease as you look forward to the 24 or 25 timeframe. So, and that's a piece that's important as we're out talking to the agencies. They want to be able to see your plan and get an idea of how you're going to get yourselves in that comfortable range.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. And then lastly, making some notes on as you kind of presented some of the other increases that we're experiencing internally. I'll read a couple. Inflation in the energy sector is up 17%. Specifically, I think in the electricity sector, it's up 14. From May 21 to May 22 per the EIA, rates are up 11%. Tell me if I get any of these numbers wrong. 19% increase in coal prices. I think I heard 29% increase in on-peak power expenses, and I'm sure I missed several, but I guess my point is, how are we able to mitigate those so substantially? I mean, we're going to talk about rates here in a second, but no general rate increase, and I consider to be a pretty modest fuel and purchase power increase. Are the numbers correct? That's a joke. That's a joke.
Yeah. Okay, good.
How are
the numbers are correct?
Yeah. So like, can you shed some light on I mean, is it as simple as belt tightening, or what are we doing to mitigate those pretty significant costs on behalf of our customer owners? Could you shed some light on that for me?
Yeah, you know, I guess one item that I would really highlight, you know, when we go back to, again, the decommissioning slide, we saw that there was quite a bit of additional funds that had come through from the DOE. And so, you know, that definitely assists with contributions that otherwise would have come through, we would have been making into the trust. And so again, that creates some additional headroom for us. And so as we think through other items, you know, I'd say that was the most notable. We did, again, as I'd highlight, spend quite a bit of time focusing on the 4 priorities to reduce other costs that would have come through. A lot of time was spent looking at headcount asks to make sure that those were only critical, those that were needed for additional you know, new resources or to improve reliability. So what I would say is just a lot of effort gone through kind of the RAWS process to look at headcount, O&M, reduce any unrequired costs. What we were very focused on trying to mitigate the general rate increase. And so trying to keep that as low as possible, seeing the fact that we had the additional reimbursements from the DOE was really beneficial in terms of our ability to get to that no general rate increase outcome for our customers.
If I may add, and Jeff, you're absolutely right. The other piece that's super important here is growth, right? Not only are we paying more for prices, but the volume that all of our customers consumed last year and the one that we're expecting our customers to consume next year is significantly higher. We are a utility that is growing. So all of these additional expenditures and capital investments, et cetera, it's to serve a growing load. So that those additional revenues are also helping to offset the additional expenditures. So this is important. If we were a utility that was flat, that we were not experiencing any growth, these type of expenditures would hit us even harder. But the fact that we are still able to attract good businesses, large, small, medium customers to our region. I understand you all discussed economic development earlier today. This is exactly the type of growth that economic development at all levels, from residential, commercial, industrial, is helping bring those additional revenues to help offset that additional rate increase. So I think we are, in my opinion, sitting in a relatively healthy platform where we are growing. We are expanding. We are paying more for purchase power and commodity prices, but that additional growth is something that needs to be taken into account going forward.
Thank you, Javier. That's an important point that I missed. Again, as we highlighted, the 6.8% increase in load growth, again, that translates to $86 million of proceeds. So again, thank you, Javier.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, Director Moody. Director Kavanaugh?
Thanks, Rick. It's never good news when we have to raise people's rates. And in supporting what Craig just said, it's certainly a surprise, a pleasant surprise that the increase isn't even more significant. Bottom line is, folks are going to have to pay more money for their electricity next year. One question I guess I have is, how much of an impact on this rate increase we're going to have is a result of power with purpose? Is it easy to say, or is it too complex, I guess, to break it down?
Yeah, Director Kavanaugh, great question. We do have the ability to reflect what contribution is from a capital perspective, but much more difficult, I think, to try to work through how that would relate to rates. You know, as we look at the FPPA, well, obviously that's not coming into play because we're not anticipating those assets until 2024. So they're really not going to drive anything relative to the FPPA. We don't have anything from a general rate increase. And so, again, everything that you're seeing relative to a rate increase is associated with the FPPA, which is directly as a result of our wholesale activity. So power purchase power, fuel, and offsets with our off systems, our wholesale sales. Again, power with purpose as it relates to the increase isn't getting driven by power with purpose.
I realize the culprit is our fuel purchase prices, but I thought perhaps, and I realize we're holding the line on our general rates. However, it's would have been nice, I suppose, if we could have offset it somewhat on that side. But I appreciate it, and if we could ever come up with a real direct answer, I'd appreciate that as far as what power with the purpose is really costing us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kavanaugh. Do you have another question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Mulhoff.
Yeah, so Jeff, thank you so much for this explanation of the COP. You know, for the 4 years that I've been on the board, we've been talking about resource adequacy. We've been talking about technological transformation and two-way communication and facilities. And I'm just really excited to see us moving forward with those initiatives as a priority, because I think that they will help us to do our work better and make us position us for the future. So I was really excited to hear those outlined by you and to see how those translate into the corporate operating plan. And you know, in our PI committee, we had a good overview of the work that's also going to be done in an area that you kind of just brushed over, which was the initiatives in the customer service area for customer owned generation and distribution and also energy efficiency and demand management. So I know that there are increases built into the budget like that, even though we haven't discussed them. But I know that in the PI committee, we really got a good deep dive into how much we're going to increase those initiatives to kind of offset a little bit of the demand growth that we're seeing. So that was just a comment. It wasn't a question, and no response is necessary. But thank you.
Thank you, Director. Oh, go ahead. Yes, thank you, both. Director Williams, before I go to you, just an add-on to Director Mulhoff's comments. In some emails that we had, there was a phrase asking for clarity. So most of the work that Director Mulhoff just discussed happens in the operating budget, not the capital budget, right? And I saw the preliminary COP contains 1.5 million of incremental investment in demand side management and energy efficiency strategies. Is that in addition to 2022, or is that? I'm just asking clarification on that phrase, incremental investment for demand side management and energy efficiency strategies. And you're muted, evidently, Mr. Bishop.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I apologize, my screen's gone blank.
No.
Jeff, I can help you on that one. To answer your question, Director Yoder, yes, it is incremental to the 2022 amount.
So it's in addition. Good news. Thank you very much. And then also for the directors who are not part of the finance committee, the book, the COP book, there are some slides that represent that book that are in the finance committee slide deck just prior to the slides that we saw here today. Just so that you know that. Okay, Director Williams, sorry to delay you. Please go ahead.
Not a problem. Appreciate that. Jeff, you mentioned AMI several times, and I'm glad to hear that's a priority in our capital spend looking forward. Can you provide some overview of the strategic value of AMI that we anticipate once that project is complete? Just remind us, why is it that this is such a high priority and one of the top 4 strategic prioritization items in the COP for 2023?
If I may, Director Williams, let me take that one, because I think this one ties really well with the Power in the Future 2050 vision we referenced earlier today. There is virtually no scenario under all the work that went into Power in the Future 2050 that does not require OPPD to have two-way communication, not only with our customer owners, but basically with every single piece of asset that we own. That is essential for the success of the district. Let me just get a little bit more tactical and give you an example of how important this is for our customer owners. A year and a half ago, when we had the July 2021 storm that took power out of 2/3 of our customer owners, it was really hard for us to know exactly the location and all the customer owners that had lost power, because we don't have a way for us to communicate with homes on a 24/7 basis, whether the meter communicates to us or us communicating back to the meter. We had to ask many times, if you're without power, you need to call OPPD and let us know you're without power. That certainly is the case today. And so I'm giving you just a very easy tactical example of what AMI would do for our customer owners, where if you lose power and we have advanced meter infrastructure, we will know immediately. As soon as your power goes off, we would know immediately that your power is off. In fact, you could be at work and we would be the one notifying you that your power is out, and we would also be able to notify you about the estimated restoration time, etc. So just from the very simple but incredibly important function of communication, AMI allows us to do that. Now, as we look also to the electrification of the economy and how we're moving to pathways to decarbonization, etc., having advanced meter infrastructure allows us to much better interact with customers. As customers want to interact with us, if you have electric vehicles, if you have heat pumps, if you have different devices at home, not only residential but also commercial customers and industrial for sure, it's how do we better align pricing, for example, price our energy services depending on the time of the day that they're used to better reflect the true cost for the district. That is something that we today, for the most part, we really cannot do at scale with the metering technology we have today. That type of pricing signals and different products would be available, but advanced meter infrastructure is a key ingredient for that reality to happen. So hopefully that gives you a high level overview of why AMI is such an important strategic priority for us. Now, let me also temper a little bit of the excitement here. We are not, let me repeat, we are not planning on start to replace meters next year with this new technology. There are many investments that need to happen before we put the meters on. We are already starting to do RFPs and procurement of metering technology, but there is quite a bit of geospatial technology, data management technology, the backbone of the system that needs to be in place before we actually go out and start replacing the meters. So that is the prioritization that will go out next year, and I expect in the years to come in 2024, 25, certainly 2026, we will start seeing then the actual meters being replaced, and for us to start to live this new reality of two-way communications. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we've talked in the past about the ability to determine outages and that being a critical feature at some points. I'm glad to hear the focus on the advanced rate structures. I know we've talked about that during the rate workshops. That's a strong priority for me, and I want to make sure and discuss it proactively before we have the capital expenditures completed, because there are decisions we will need to make ahead of time in order to enable all of the potential value from AMI about the way in which we might share real-time data with third-party vendors who can aggregate things on the grid edge and make that valuable to our customers and to the utility. And so I appreciate hearing about the advanced rate structures that will become available once all of the backbone infrastructure is in place and the meters have been installed. So I appreciate the clarification, and I think it's important for others to realize that as we highlight this being a priority over what I anticipate will be a few COPs over the next few years, that as this continues to reoccur as a top priority for us, there will be significant benefits to our customers and to the utility, both directions, from really leaning into the way in which we see technology changing and improving things across the grid. So thanks for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Are you complete, Mr. Williams?
I do have a couple other questions. I don't see other hands, so if it's all right, I'll go ahead.
Please do.
Great. We talked a little bit about the FPPA adjustment here, but not having a general rate increase. And I guess this question is somewhat leading into next year. We don't anticipate significant rate structure changes going into odd number years. We're on that 2-year rate cycle. So I guess looking forward toward the next COP, we have talked in the past about rate structure changes, specifically the declining block in the residential sector. And so although that change is not recommended at this time, what will be necessary in order to be prepared to implement a change like that by 2024 will need to have occurred in 2023. So as we look at the rate structure updates that the rate updates that we're seeing now, primarily the FPPA, does our work plan for 2023 anticipate having us prepared for rate structure changes going into 2024?
Great question, Director Williams. Just in terms of our rate process, the work that we're doing to get through that, I don't see that as an item that's impacting the plan itself. I'm not just trying to be direct in terms of the process that we will follow. We're planning to bring that back out in the first quarter in terms of the results of that process and how we plan to roll that out. So I don't think there's any rate implications in terms of how we need to structure or do anything differently relative to the FPPA. Thinking through and forward in terms of that process.
And I apologize. I agree that there are no necessary changes to the FPPA or the rates at this time. I guess we have talked in the past about steps that would be necessary for a long lead item like that, and I'm not sure when else would be an appropriate time to discuss that, because on 2 previous years during COP discussions, we had talked about a board desire to remove the declining block in the residential rate structure, and then that had not yet been completed. And so since we are talking about rates now, I want to express my desire to see that removed by next year, because we are talking about rates this year, and it will take several months of implementation. Again, understanding that's not a capital expenditure, but it is a rate structure discussion, and this felt like an appropriate time to discuss it now, so that we don't get caught in a situation where we don't have the time or the manpower to complete that work before 2024. And if that is off topic, I apologize, Director Yoder, but I didn't know another time to talk about what we anticipate in future years relative to the changes we're seeing this year.
Other comments? Director Williams?
Oh, I apologize. Are we anticipating any discussion after the rate action here, the final portion of the presentation, or is this the end of the discussion?
I'm trying to wrap it up, but as so we can move into the rate discussion further. CFO Bishop, did you want to respond to his question or his comment?
Yeah, no, it's I think we want to make sure we follow the right process. So as it relates to more traditionally what you'd call the revenue requirement, that's really what we're asking for here in terms of, hey, this is what we're asking for. We've highlighted how that would flow through relative to the FPPA. We're going to talk about it here in just a moment in terms of how that would impact customer rates. So I think it's probably a nice transition point. I would say this as it relates to additional structural changes relative to rate design. We've got a process, I think, that's well underway to address that. We want to make sure that we are following that process that the board has agreed to. So I think that will naturally take place and continue on next quarter. And so with that, I would ask that we move forward with the rate conversation, assuming the rate topic relative to the COP, Director Yoder and Director Williams.
Okay, so very good. Before we move on to the rate, we still have another director that I'd like to hear from, and I still would like to allow. We're not going to segue at this point. That's what I'm saying. Director Williams, do you have any other comments? Yes. Do you have any other comments that you would like to make at this point? Questions?
Yeah, I believe in governance and PI. We talked about both demand side management and customer owned generation. And so for clarification, I don't anticipate, or I don't believe that from the slides in the finance pre-committee meeting that there is any funding directed toward an incentive for the pilot program for customer owned generation. Is that correct?
I did not see any.
And I apologize, I didn't realize those slides were only in the finance committee portion, and I didn't get a chance to go through them. I guess I just wanted to echo my comments over recent months and most of this year that I very strongly support a direct incentive based on the pilot program that we implemented in 2022 for customer-owned generation, specifically tied to the Trade Ally program. And this is something I've commented on a number of times in the past, and I I guess I don't know how to express that comment any more clearly. I realize that as one director, I do not get to dictate what is or is not in the COP. We have had discussions on this topic, but I don't feel like we have fully resolved whether or not this is determined to be a priority of the board, whether we feel this is something that we would like to see in the COP. And Director Yoder, I'm not sure if you have guidance on how we should resolve this, or if you feel that my comments alone do not justify any additional discussion. I would respect that as well.
Well, I think your comments, as pointed out by Director Moody in his government committee report, when he asked about item 2, where we did specifically talk about that demand side management, he said we would be talking about it further in this point of our board meeting today. So in terms of timing, I think it's appropriate to talk about it. Whether you get other members of the board to chime in with you or not, that's another question. I can offer my perspective. I also feel that the information that we saw in government committee, which I also believe was the same thing that was presented in PI committee, I lamented. I'll just use that word. I lamented the information that was offered to us as being a rationale for not including more support for customer-owned generation. I think OPPD has a role in accelerating technologies that are supportive of our vision of the future. OPPD has, whether we like it or not, OPPD shapes the market, whether we're intentional about it or not. Our rates change what people do. And that's why we have an economic development program. That's why we do things. And so if the board should choose to support customer-owned generation, then that's a message we can send off as part of the COP consideration, and management will do with it what it wants. But that's where I feel about it. What I feel about this. Anyone else want to speak to this point specifically? I'm not seeing anyone jumping in.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in. I think it's dangerous precedent to get into the detail in this way on the budget. And I have a real serious slippery slope concern. I appreciate your desire, Eric, but there's been no socialization of anything. So I'm not interested in socializing it now until I have something more concrete to actually consider. And that takes work. What's the higher level strategic directive that we're after here? Yes, I want to support our customers doing what they want to do. So help me connect those dots, if you would.
I guess if that's to me, I had provided some comments in governance. I think there are multiple benefits. One, a desired outcome for me is more distributed generation. But two, the market shaping aspect that Rick mentioned, we have a trade ally program, but I see no connection between the current structure of the market and any reason why a contractor would choose to participate in the trade ally program, or any reason why a customer would choose to come to our trade ally program as a primary source for information. We know that we are being absolutely bombarded by extremely high dollar, very targeted social media advertising, which is confusing to customers. It shows $0 down, it shows complicated financing structures, and it leads to a significant portion of the benefits of distributed generation being captured by out-of-state contractors, not left with either the customer owners or the utility. And that is ongoing right now, and we know it. This has led to a policy change at the city of Omaha requiring additional permitting and licensed engineer plan submittals, causing an additional delay in project implementation, all of which was not occurring as we outlined a trade ally program to support best actors by providing the carrot of an incentive for those who choose to participate in that program. And we have seen successful programs like this in other places. And so I guess the bottom line here is that this is happening whether we engage or not. And if we choose not to have an active role in helping to shape the market here, this happens at us and to us and around us, but not really with us. And the technology is only accelerating and dropping in price. And the longer we allow the distributed energy resources to happen outside of any direct engagement with OPPD, other than a program which allows them to be installed, the less control we have over supporting our customer owners as a public power district and in shaping the market in ways that are beneficial. So I guess I just really feel like we have seen significant increases. The report from SD7 showing the basically geometric increase in number of projects submitted over the last few years is concerning to me, that more of that will occur, but again, without any specific reason for customers or contractors to directly participate with OPPD. And I feel like that is not in the best interest of our customers. That is not in the best long-term interest of distributed generation serving the outcomes of the utility or the outcomes of the customers themselves, and that it is leading to bad outcomes for people in our community.
Dr. Molhoff?
Yeah, so as far as incentives for customer-owned generation, I'm with Craig. I don't see that relating specifically to any one of our strategic directives. And I don't think that Eric has pointed it back to us. You know, the reasons he gave were good reasons. I mean, there's all kinds of good reasons why we could do incentives, but right now, customer generation and solar installations are skyrocketing in the district. One of the reasons that you do incentives is to spur early growth of technology. That point is past. We have really passed the point of where people were resistant to solar, and we've, you know, from the graph that we saw in SD7, the numbers of solar installations are almost exponentially growing, and so to stick incentives in at this point is really counterproductive, and we can better spend that money on other programs that we already socialized, that we already looked at when we looked at our demand reduction and energy efficiency slides. And yeah, I wouldn't really be in favor of slipping in, more incentives at this point for customer-owned generation. So that's just my.
So, Rick, if you don't mind, I'd like to respond to Craig's point regarding what specific portion of an SD does this align to. In the past, I have suggested including distributed energy resources explicitly in SD9 for resource planning, SD7 for environmental sensitivity, and SD2 for rate structures. And at each time, I was told it is inappropriate to specify a particular type of technology at the strategic directive level. So when we ask now, which of the points in the strategic directives does this particular objective align with, I got to say, it feels like at the high level, that's too low. At the low level, that's too high. We seem to be jumping back and forth in ways to avoid explicitly being involved in whether or not the utility supports distributed energy resources. And to the longer term structure here, there are two specific problems. One, we know that when solar is installed, if it doesn't include storage, it won't. No one goes back to put storage in later. Just doesn't happen. We don't know what the benefits of solar and storage will be to the utility long term, but FERC 2222 will tell us that we will see virtual power plant aggregation occurring in SPP in the next few years. Every solar installation that does not include storage, that does not participate in a trade ally program with the utility, is one more that we will not be able to help bring to our benefit long term. And lastly, the long-term outcome of distributed energy resources in our area is guided by the legislature's statute related to providing net metering. If we look at the current number of installations and we project forward, sometime in the next few years, we will likely hit the 1% mandated cap. What will we do when we hit the net metering cap? Do we have any policy to proactively address that, or will we just say we hit the 1% cap, we're going to cut it off? I feel like by continuing to not have any specific design of program implementation related to customer-owned generation, there are very foreseeable problems that are occurring, and we just keep not addressing them. And when they occur in the future, we will look back and say, geez, why didn't we take a more proactive stance to recognize the benefit of these resources, to support them, to design a market in a way that is beneficial to our customers and to the utility, and to know where we're going long term. And it sounds like I'm not finding support from enough others in this area, but I just feel like this is a very foreseeable benefit that we are letting slip away from us because we are actively choosing not to have any hand in shaping the market and supporting local contractors. And I just really wish that at some point we would be more proactive in that type of innovation funding in our COP. Thanks.
Director Bogner.
I'll just highlight, I don't personally, I agree with you where you're going, but we don't have, like, from the level of the board, we cannot dictate special programs with the COP. And I feel like this is a special program. That's not our role as a board member. So, this falls to, maybe Tim McRavy's group to come up with the program that then would feed up into the COP that we would then approve. To your point, I get that we have not found a great place for it to live in the SDs either, because we should not be mandating specific technology, because again, this is like special interest, this treads on special interest, and it's not okay. So, so with it, I'm not sure where we take this. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm gonna elbow my way in at this point, a little bit more. So if we're not going to focus on a specific technology, which customer-owned generation is a lot of technologies, right? I guess what I'm most interested in this discussion is while I appreciate the numbers we've got, Director Mohoff, the numbers that we've gotten in the presentation that shows doubling over time over the past few years, we don't have any idea where we are relative to the market capacity. Are we past that tipping point, or are we nowhere near it yet? We don't know. And nor, to Eric's point, do we know where that customer adoption rate is compared to where OPPD operates optimally, right? So we don't know that either. And I don't, while we got some backward looking numbers, we don't have a good model for what we want it to be for the board to say, yeah, that's a good part of your strategy, or even what it could be. So I guess, while gut level, I would absolutely love to remove from our affordability mission. I would love to remove as many soft costs as we can to the adoption. And I think that should always be a goal. I don't know where we are. I don't think I have heard yet where we ought to be pushing with a good, clear view of what our economic model is for the adoption. So that's where I am, Eric. Director Moody, your hand is up.
Yep, two things. One is, Rick, I think you just underscored why this is the space for the staff to work, which is I don't have any mechanism or tool. I mean, it's not my job to foresee, predict, model what the optimal level type of customer-owned generation is. So I'm certainly not interested in deploying an incentive program for something that we don't necessarily know how it fits into the longer view. And then I guess so that's one. Two is, um, I think I heard perhaps a suggestion from you, Director Williams, that we've kind of thrown our hands up and said we're not doing anything in this market, and so if we're not going to be in the market, then like I take issue with that. Perhaps we're not doing exactly what your desires are in terms of how we show up in this market, but we are absolutely investing in it. We're taking action, um, and I appreciate the fact that there's been a lot of work done in that space, and there's a lot more to do. I mean, this market's changing really fast, but we're not turning our backs on it. We're not walking around blindfolded in it either. I think we're taking an active role already. What that looks like in the future is part of what the staff's job is to figure out.
One final point of clarification, Craig. I appreciate your point that that we have put significant work into this, and I know that Tim and Kirk and everyone on their teams have spent time developing a program and moving toward implementation of better guidelines, better information, better policies, better tracking, and a huge amount of work that is informing us about what is occurring. And I definitely appreciate that. I guess my concern is that the amount of additional engagement that we have relative to the additional work that is occurring in the market seems like it might be not fully up to what we should anticipate in the future. And so I apologize that it seems like I was saying I didn't feel we were taking sufficient effort in this area. I do think that we are taking great steps forward, and we see that in the reporting in SD7 and the annual net metering report. But it just seems like there is significantly more occurring, and we need to recognize that we should be more involved. And so I appreciate all the comments. I don't have any more follow-up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Williams, and thank you everybody
and I will return your call as soon as I can. Thank you.
For your comments. I apologize. My chat window is not updating in real time, so I saw some chats that I wish I had responded to sooner in doing traffic direction here. Okay, Director Spurgeon, you did have a hand up. I was letting the conversation flow, and please, I want to hear what you have to say here.
Well, I was just thinking, Director Williams' reference to the declining block thing, and I can see that, boy, that is a burr under your saddle, Director Williams, and I can understand why. But part of our reason in tabling that was because it was going to impact economically people in our district who really couldn't stand that. And the report that we had regarding customers, it's about a quarter of our customers can't afford to pay their bill now. And so you'd say, oh, that's an easy thing for us, an easy way for us to go. But I think it's not quite that simple. I do think that all of the work, all the cross-team action in the corporate operating plan, all across the district, I think that will help us move to that, hopefully sooner than later. But I don't think it's being neglected. It's what I see happening here through this corporate operating plan is we have to do this first, and then we can do the next step. After that step, and then we can do the next step. It's like the technology that CEO Fernandez said has to be laid in before we can do the automated metering stuff. I mean, you just can't put in the meters and say it's going to work unless you have all the lines and everything figured out that leads back to the center. So I just I guess I'm urging a little patience, and let's just keep on and keeping on and see where we get as fast as we can. Thanks. Thank you.
Director Spurgeon, Director Mulhoff, you have the last word before we move on to the rates.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mary, for bringing that point up. I appreciate that. I think there's some work that needs to be done before we do our final changes on the rate structure review. But going back to Eric's comment before, last year we did do some incentives for solar. We did a pilot. for solar. And I know that Tim's team, Tim McElravy's team is using that data. They've taken that data, they're using it, that pilot, to determine what the market should look like, what in the incentive was beneficial to the district and what wasn't. And so, I think that we're doing some work in that space and in that direction. But for it to be included in this corporate operating plan, I think is premature, and I would allow Tim McElravy's team to do their work before we would move ahead with anything like that. So I just wanted to make that final comment before we close out this section. Thank you.
And you got the final comment. We're moving on to the next section, and that where we'll be talking about rate changes. Mr. Bishop.
Excellent. Let's move forward. We'll make this relatively quick. Appreciate everybody's patience. What we've got here is an explanation of the fuel and purchase power adjustment. This goes back to when it was started back in 2011. We've got rider number 461. Effectively, there's two components that go into it. There's a base rate, which is that piece is an energy charge that's included in our general rate. And then we've got the separate FPPA factor. And again, that's what we're going to adjust here relative to our increased commodity costs. Again, that gets charged to customers based upon their usage, based upon kilowatt hour consumption. So customers do have the ability to adjust their impact of this charge based upon how much they do consume. We do highlight the increase. Again, that's going to take us from 0.186 cents per kilowatt hour to 0.48 cents per kilowatt hour. Again, that would be effective in January of 2023. In total, a 2.9% increase. If we look at on the next slide, it'll show how that impacts the different customer classes. Again, since this is all energy based, you're going to see it more notably impacted on customers that have a higher energy consumption. So as a percentage of their bill. So you'll see a lower impact relative to residential, commercial increase, and then industrial being the most notably impacted, as again, they've got a higher energy consumption versus a fixed charge consumption. And as I highlighted before, the customers have the ability to adjust how much this impacts them because it is based upon consumption. As we move on to the next slide, we do have just a quick item that we're looking to change. This is for rate 261M as it relates to pilot taxes. Specifically, we're required to pay 5% of incorporated retail revenues to our respective counties. This is required by the Nebraska State Constitution. Why we're proposing the change? Well, the way the pilot is currently incorporated into our rate structure, it's currently estimated and incorporated into our demand charge. Obviously, as consumption changes over the course of time, we over or under collect. So the solution is fairly elegant to eliminate it from the demand charge and put it as a separate line item on the customer bill. And so again, we will not over or under collect. We'll charge them appropriately for the amount of consumption and the associated pilot portion that needs to be charged back to them. So again, this is it's revenue neutral to the utility. I really like this outcome, and it again doesn't change their bill, but ensures that we don't over or under collect and have to capture that and track that over the course of time. So a good solution from that perspective. The last item that we've got is associated with our street lights. Again, as we change our street lights from high pressure sodium and mercury vapor to LEDs, we've got a whole set of existing methods in place on how we structure and charge for those. This really gets us, it's been a project that's been underway for many, many years with our customer service folks. As we've now transitioned to a great degree to LEDs, this just makes sense in terms of making sure that our appropriate rate actions incorporate that as well. So again, should be revenue neutral, but it's just a better way to incorporate those methods that are utilized for charging our LED streetlights. Director Yoder hopefully, so we've got those 3 items that had come through relative to rate actions. The FPPA, we spent quite a bit of time talking about that. The 261M is, again, more administrative. And then same thing with the LED rate method change as well. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
Any questions on the rate changes that will be action items in December? Is that correct? Yes.
Correct.
Yeah. Any clarifying questions, comments? I don't see anything. So with that, okay, everybody's saying don't stop here. The finance committee is done. Thank you.